everyone, my name is Sally Fowler. I'm the owner and trainer for Disabled Advantage. Thank you for joining me on my Patreon tier, Service Dog Questions Answered. In today's question, I'm not really going to be answering a question so much as sharing an experience that a lot of teams will probably have at some point in their partnership. And if you've never had this happen to you, I'm really glad that it hasn't, but it is a valuable learning experience, depending on how you choose to see it. Today's topic is access issues. So when you work with me, part of working with me is that I'm going to make sure you understand how to handle access issues. We're going to talk through various scenarios, practice giving you a chance, stating the law and saying what your dog does and answering the two important questions that businesses are allowed to ask, which are, is this a service dog for a disability and what work does it do? Those are loosely the wording of those questions. But sometimes it doesn't matter what you say. And access issues they're very stressful. They're very anxiety inducing. Even if you don't have anxiety per se, they still trigger anxiety in the moment. And if you do have anxiety and you do have problems with people getting in your space, they become extra traumatic. And the thing that a lot of people don't talk about when it comes to access issues is the level of vulnerability that you feel in the moment. And the level of kind of defenselessness almost. But those are just my experiences. My experiences may be totally different from someone else's experiences. And access issues can break one of two ways. They can go in your favor where you explain yourself and the person goes, "Oh, I had no idea. Thank you for explaining it to me. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for being patient. Please go on with your day and continue with why you're here." Or they can break the other way, and no matter how polite you are, how professional you are, how well spoken you are, someone's just not gonna listen to you. They're not gonna believe you. They don't care about the law. They think it doesn't pertain to them. Maybe they don't understand it completely, and you're gonna be asked to leave. And that's a really crappy situation. And there's different kinds of access issues. So in this answer, in this topic, I'm going to be talking about different types of access issues, and then I'm also going to talk about two that have happened to me personally. Two that have happened to me personally where it did not go great. And how I felt, how I handle it, and how I feel about it now looking back on both of them years later. Access issues vary. In general, an access issue means that you are trying to go someplace with your service dog or your service dog in training. There are certain states in the US that grant service dog teams permission to take their service dog in training to public locations where pet dogs are not normally allowed to go for the purpose of training the animal. Depending on the state, they may require that an official organization is the one taking the service dog in training, or the wording might be that as long as it's the trainer doing it, it's okay. And so therefore, people who are owner training are protected under that statute. For more information on finding out if your state grants service dogs in training, teams that are in training, access, I am going to include a link in the post that will help you guys figure that out. So an access issue is when somebody won't let you in some place that you are trying to go with either your service dog or your service dog in training. I do want to be very clear, this post is exactly about the United States. I am not talking about other countries. I don't know other countries' laws regarding service dogs nearly well enough to talk about it. So in the US, an access law is when access problem is when you're not allowed in someplace. And that can look like different conversations. In talking to various teams, I've had teams tell me that they get followed around a store while they're shopping, almost like a store person is waiting for some sort of infraction to throw them out, or a store person follows them for a while, and then either the team turns around and confronts them, or the store owner finally confronts them, or the store employee finally confronts them and, hey, dogs aren't allowed. And you can state your rights. It's really, really important that you, as a service dog handler, know what the laws are. You need to know what the federal laws are. You need to be able to say that this is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Restate that it's federal law. You need to also know local laws. Where it starts to get a little weird is that the ADA doesn't restrict breeds. But if you're in a state or a county that does restrict breeds and you have a service dog in training, not a full service dog, the ADA is not going to be protecting you. The state law is what's governing you if you and your service dog in training are out in public. And so a lot of the protections that are afforded to service dog teams under federal law don't apply. And so you might be subject to breed discrimination if your dog is still in training, because like I said, you're under state law, not federal law. So when you become a service dog handler, it's extremely important that you take the time to fully understand what laws are at play and what laws are governing you and your team in that exact moment. Are you under state law or are you under federal law? And if you're not sure, if nobody's had this conversation with you yet, please sign up for a coaching session with me, and I will teach you as much as I can about handler rights and laws regarding service animal teams. And I will help you figure out the laws for your particular state. Because it is something that's really important that I'm not sure all teams are being taught by every trainer who works with them. And sometimes you can find the right information online, but I've also spent hundreds of hours reading as much as I can about the laws, and going to more than just one website to get information. Other ways in access law, I don't know why my brain keeps going for access law. Other ways an access issue can happen are right at the gate. So you're trying to go into an event, you're trying to go into a restaurant, you're trying to go into a store, and for whatever reason, there's an employee standing right there waiting for you, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, dogs aren't allowed in here. You say, well, this is a service dog. I'm disabled. He guides me. He does hearing tasks for me. He's a mobility dog. He helps me stand up. He braces. He prevents falls. You know, you don't have to go off the whole rambling list of tasks that your service dog does. You are not required to tell people what your disability is. You can just say one task, even if you want. Just pick one task that you can say off the top of your head really easily. I usually go for, well, my dog does brace work. He prevents falls and helps me get up when I do fall, and he finds help. Those are usually the things that pop into my mind right off the bat. And it could break in your favor, and the person could say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Thank you for explaining it to me. Have a nice day. And you're allowed to go in and continue with your day. Or they stick to their guns and say, no, dogs are not allowed in here. We have health codes and There might be people who are allergic to dogs or people who are afraid of dogs. And if you have a fully trained service dog, you can say, well, under the ADA, those aren't reasons for denying access to us. And that's where having an SDIT gets a little bit more weird. You have to fully understand what your state's particular laws are regarding service dogs and training and those particular lines of argument from business owners. But sometimes knowing the law, it doesn't matter. Other types of access issues that have happened to teams are you're enjoying yourself, everything is fine. Somebody realizes you have a dog in the store or their restaurant, and suddenly they're asking you to leave, and you've already been there for an hour. That's a weird situation. And sometimes it happens because somebody looks down and realizes you have a dog. Sometimes it happens because your dog makes a mistake, which is not your fault if that's what happens. But if your dog gets startled and barks or stands up all of a sudden and shakes their coat out or, jumps up on a person because they are in training, they make mistakes. Or even if your fully trained service dog is just having an off day and they let out a bark or they let out a little howl or something, or they smell really offensive. Smelling really offensive actually is a reason to get you thrown out of stores, so that's something to be aware of. But if they cause some sort of disturbance that draws attention to you, technically business owners are allowed to ask teams to leave if the dog is causing a disturbance. Unfortunately, a lot of business owners take that too far. The dog makes one mistake, one tiny mistake. It's not a disturbance, it's a mistake, but the business owner causes a disturbance because of their reaction to the situation. It's kind of like they're looking for a reason to throw you out. And those are, in my opinion, those are the crappiest access issues, because you were there, you were enjoying yourself, you were having a good time, your dog made a mistake, and we try to work through our dog's mistakes. We file it away, we try to fix it in the moment, and then we know that that's something that we need to work harder on. But the business owner takes that as an opportunity to single us out, draw a ton of attention to us, and cause a scene. And it makes us nervous about going out in public again. And it's really not fair. I wish the general public was more understanding that service dogs make mistakes, especially that service dogs in training make mistakes, and that mistakes are part of the learning process. Now, if your dog's mistake is that you dropped the leash and they start tearing around the store having a zoomie, that's totally different from your dog gets startled by something and lets out a quiet little woof, or they, are trying to learn how to retrieve items off of a shelf and they grab the wrong item and puncture it, or, get slobber on it or something. And while we're there, when I'm working on retrieve work with Austin in the grocery store, I usually practice in the office supplies section, because generally if he is going to get rough with something, it's a little bit safer, and I probably need it anyway. So I try to have him practice with items that I know I need. Even if I don't need it right now, I know I'm going to need it later, like highlighters and paper, so that if he does get a little rough with it and he damages it or he gets slobber all over it, I'm just going to go ahead and buy it. It's not a big deal. But that way it's not being left to, be someone else's problem. So there's different levels of disturbances, and it really depends on, there are certainly times when service dog teams do deserve to get thrown out of a place, but unfortunately, it's way more common for teams to get stopped at the entrance or at the very beginning of something than it is for them to get called out in the middle of their existence. And the outrageous thing is that legitimate service dog teams are more likely to get asked to leave or get denied entrance someplace than a fake service dog or someone with an unruly pet. However it seems to land, places that attract the type of people who try to fake a service dog or bring their pet in because they've seen a service dog in there before, they're usually the business owner is nervous about throwing someone out, and so they just don't do anything in case they're wrong. But then a legitimate service dog does something wrong or pays for the actions of an unruly pet that came in earlier and is unfairly judged as the result. And I've heard from other teams too that they've witnessed fake service dogs or pet dogs being unruly or almost putting their team in jeopardy, and the staff does absolutely nothing because they're worried about a lawsuit. They're worried about retribution. And the sad thing is that most of the teams who have access issues, we technically can file a complaint with the DOJ, but we're disabled. So a lot of us don't have the extra energy to expend chasing down a lawsuit like that for a violation of civil rights for months or years. So it's simpler if we just file it away and let it go and avoid that store, which is horrible and heartbreaking when people are taking out their fake service dogs and pets and are all too willing to yell at business owners or yell at employees and make them scared to tell them to leave. And then we get the brunt of it. We come in, our dog's perfectly well behaved, but because they had a bad experience, nobody's allowed in anymore. Another common, really, really common type of access issue that just, it's irritating, are with hotels. And the reason this one is particularly irritating to me is because I've had this happen to me about 3 or 4 times. And it's happened enough times that whenever I travel with my husband and my service dog, or whenever I travel anywhere with my service dog that I'm going out of state lines, I actually take a travel folder with me that I have printouts of the state laws and the federal laws. So for whatever state we're going to drive through and potentially have to stop in, I have a printout of their laws regarding service animals, and I also have a printout of the ADA regarding service animals, and I have a printout of the ADA's FAQs on service animals, where the DOJ went back and expanded the ADA to answer a lot of common questions like breed discrimination and allergies and things like that. And I carry that with me everywhere we go, every state we cross through, and take it with me when we check into a hotel at the end of a very long, what's usually an 8-hour drive, where we're exhausted. Because more than likely, here's the thing, we don't like staying at pet-friendly hotels because pets are generally dangerous. And I don't mean to sound harsh or judgmental towards pet owners. I know there are pet owners who try to make an effort in training their dog, but by and large, most people don't. And pet-friendly hotels open us up to all sorts of dangerous scenarios, like waiting for an elevator and then suddenly being greeted by a dog who hates other dogs, or hates big dogs, or hates women, or hates men, and lunges off the elevator at us and my very, very valuable, absolutely necessary for normal functioning life service dog. So it's safer for us to stay at non-pet friendly hotels because then we don't have to deal with that crap. But if we stay at a pet friendly hotel, no matter how much you try and convince them that it's against federal law to charge a pet fee for a service animal, they still try to charge you a pet fee for a service animal. It's against federal law, but they try anyways. So we try to stay at non-pet friendly hotels. But what usually happens is we come in and then they hear me give some sort of, maybe they see us come through the door. If they don't see us come through the door, they hear me give a command to Robbie, or now Austin. We haven't traveled with Austin yet, but they hear me give a command to Robbie, and then they bring up something, or we're walking away and that's when they notice the dog and they call us back. And they try to argue dogs aren't allowed. And when I travel places, usually it's to go back to the East Coast where I grew up. And the best way to do that is to spend 8 hours in a car and spend 2 days driving. I can't fly because of the CRPS. I also can't fly because my dog is really big. But mainly it's because of the CRPS. So we drive everywhere. And so we're tired. And at this point, my pain level is definitely a 10 or higher, because sitting in the truck at the hard right angles of being in an upright chair and feeling the vibrations of the truck and the road for an entire day are extremely difficult on me. My husband's exhausted from doing all the driving. We both just want to go to bed and, probably have dinner. And invariably, we get questioned about Robbie's presence. And I bring out my folder. And at like 9 o'clock at night, I get to teach a hotel employee about service dog law. And I have to do it in a professional tone of voice. I have to be really polite. I have to be really patient. And the reason I have to be polite and patient and professional is because if I get belligerent, if I get defensive, then they have a reason to tell us to leave. So it doesn't matter how tired or how much pain I'm in. I have to still be the bigger person. I have to still be the best possible version of myself so that I come across as being well put together, and not argumentative and not belligerent. And so I come across as being reasonable. And that's why I carry this folder, so that I can point to this exact stuff and it can help me have that conversation with people. And yes, there are the little info cards that you can hand out, but more and more, I've had some people say, oh, well, how do I know you didn't make this at home? And I didn't. It has the DOJ seal on it, but technically you could make it at home. So I carry a giant folder of information instead. And okay, let's say we teach the night person about the service dog and it's fine. And we go on up to our room. But then in the morning, we come down for breakfast and somebody different at the hotel desk sees the dog and throws a fit about it. Like, why do you have this dog here? Dogs aren't allowed in the dining area. Well, he's a service dog. I need him for mobility assistance. I'm disabled. Nope, dogs can't be in the dining area. This is not a pet-friendly hotel. I don't know who let you in here, but you need to get out right now. And so you end up having to carry this information around with you everywhere, which gets obnoxious and tiresome. And hotels are especially annoying because I understand there are shift changes, but put a note somewhere. Hey, there's someone with a service dog here. It's within their legal rights to be here. Don't harass them. How hard would that be, honestly? And teams get caught this way in hotels because, and usually it happens when they come down for breakfast because they're not expecting a fight. They're not expecting to have to defend their legal right because they did it last night. And so that's one that can catch teams. More often than not, if I don't feel like I have the energy to deal with it, we actually tag team and one of us goes downstairs without the dog and gets food and brings it back up to the other person in the hotel room. And we just eat upstairs and then we leave as quickly as possible. But that's one that a lot of people, I think, aren't aware of as being an access issue. But it is one, and it's one that's just, it's extra difficult to work through in the moment because also it's 9 o'clock at night. You've been traveling all day. If this hotel turns you away, you have to go find another hotel or keep driving. There's a lot more on the line here than just, okay, well, I guess we're not going to this concert, or okay, well, I guess we're not going to this bar, or okay, well, I guess we'll just pick a different restaurant and leave y'all a really bad review. This is, we're exhausted, we need a place to sleep, you're turning us away, we have to go find another place to sleep. And if you chose to travel on a busy event day, you're basically up a creek. And so you have to do everything you possibly can to convince them that you have a right to be there. And some teams handle that by staying at pet-friendly hotels and just taking the risk. But that's a team choice. We choose to avoid it, but also we gauge, how tired are we? How much BS do we want to deal with tonight? Sort of a conversation. The weirder access issues I've encountered or I've heard about, I haven't encountered them personally. The weirder access issues I've heard about are from doctors' offices or places that know about service animals, like social services offices, care institutes, places like that where you're going to visit someone. Or you're going to your own medical appointment and your doctor says things like, can you just tie your service dog up outside? And those are really hard access issues to navigate because you need to go to your doctor's appointment. You need to get your medication refilled. You need something checked on. You need to be looked at. But you also have a service dog for a reason. And it's absurd that our healthcare professionals are giving us problems about our service dog being there because you would think that they would know that it's supposed to be there. And in some cases, a doctor has told someone, hey, you need a service animal. And I have talked to teams who have gone and left their dog in the car just so they can get the appointment over with. And I certainly don't judge that person for that choice at the time, because each choice that a team makes regarding their service dog in the moment with an access issue is their personal choice. It's what you feel like you need to do in the moment. Usually, we leave and just don't give someone our service, but we might have more flexibility. We might have more luxury of making that choice than other people do. Typically, I don't recommend that you tie your service dog up outside or that you leave them in your car. They are extremely valuable medical aids. And so if someone were to steal them, it would be extremely detrimental to your quality of life and to your mental well-being. The loss of a service dog is devastating. And if you're in some sort of extreme part of climate where it's really, really cold outside or it's really, really hot outside, you are putting your dog in danger. And you are also putting yourself in danger a little bit of somebody seeing your dog trapped in your car, calling the cops breaking into your car and impounding your dog, and then accusing you of being a bad person, which just adds a whole other layer of nonsense and crap and vulnerability to a really dumb situation because federal law is supposed to have protected you from all of this happening to you. And if you hear me laughing in my tone of voice, I am, because it's ludicrous that this happens to teams at all. But it does. I've had several access issues in my life with my own personal service dogs. With Robbie, I had several. With Austin, I've only had one so far. Robbie, we had, well, my first access issue with Robbie was at a Mexican restaurant in town. And that was really difficult because it was my first one. So there was that. I had heard about access issues. I'd watched the YouTube videos of access issues being filmed. I knew all the ways it could go wrong, like when people call the cops and the cops don't know service dog law and you end up in handcuffs. I'd heard all the horror stories. So I was already on edge about taking Robbie places, period. But at this point, he was a full service dog. You know, federal law was on my side. So we were at a Mexican restaurant. We were trying to get a table, and they kept arguing with me that dogs were not allowed. And the biggest problem here was that there was a literal communication divide. I did not know enough Spanish to be able to fluently explain, hey, in US federal law, this is a thing. And I tried handing them a card, and they just completely rejected it. I didn't fully understand what their defense was, but they just kept saying things about dogs and health codes. And they brought the manager over, and the manager was also not well informed, and it was very difficult to communicate. And so my mother-in-law and I just left, because it went on for about 5 minutes of me trying to be calm, trying to be composed, but they had started yelling at us. And so the entire restaurant started to turn and look at us. And it was I felt suddenly extremely vulnerable and called out, like as if somebody had pulled me out of a crowded room and pointed at me and been like, that one's disabled. That one's different. And it was a lot to handle. And it was really early still in my personal acceptance of being disabled and personal acceptance of needing a service dog. And by this point, I'd already had a few experiences already of, throughout Robbie's training, I would have people, complete strangers, used to come up to me and say, oh, it's so nice that you're training that dog for a charity or a poor disabled child or a veteran. It's so wonderful that young people are devoting their time to helping others. And, you know, when I first started training Robbie, I'm not proud of this, but there were days where I couldn't handle it. And so I would smile and say, yep, that's what I'm doing. And then I'd go cry in the car. And as I got through Robbie's training, I got more and more confident in myself and more confident in him and how he helped me. I would say, no, actually, he's my service dog. I have a neurological disorder. And people would still look me up and down trying to find my disability, which is a really weird experience if you've never gone through it yourself yet. But it's like, and I've done this before, but with horses, where I stand back and I look all over their body because they're standing a little weird, and it's my job to find the cut or find the swelling and fix it. But in that case, I was working at a barn as a trainer and as a groom and caretaker, and it was my job to make sure all the horses were alive. But when complete strangers do that to you because they're looking for what's wrong about you, it's a very weird feeling. It makes you feel very, very vulnerable and attacked and judged, because if they can't find it, there are some people who will say, yeah, I'd fake it too to get my dog in here. And that's extremely offensive. We're not faking it. We have an invisible disability, completely legitimate disability. We do need our service dog. We're not faking it. And it's actually not fun to have to take your dog everywhere you go for years. But anyways, I was still having a hard time accepting. I was still in those early phases of fully accepting being disabled, needing a service dog, and the attention that comes with walking into a store or a restaurant with a dog beside you. One of the first problems I noticed when I would go in places is people would stare at me, and not even, yeah, quietly isn't the right word, but not even subtly. They would like openly stare and point at me and Robbie and follow us around. And that's a lot of attention. That's a ton of attention for somebody to give to you who doesn't know you. And especially when you're a woman and men do it, it's creepy and it's concerning. And there were times too where we had people, I had a man chase me through a store because he wanted to pet Robbie. And when I wouldn't let him pet Robbie, he got in my face, and my husband had to physically intervene to give us space and let us get away. And so going into public and having public attention on you when you go with a service dog can be overwhelming at times. And so when it was happening at this restaurant and it was getting loud enough from the part of the business owners, not even myself, my voice was shaking and my whole body was shaking. Robbie was leaning against me. My mother-in-law is not good with confrontation, and so she was just standing there quietly. Not incredibly helpful, but it's not her fault. Confrontation is not her thing. But they kept getting louder and louder and talking faster and faster in Spanish. And with that entire restaurant stopping their day to turn and look at us, I finally just left. Got outside, had a mini panic attack, and then we went across the street to a different restaurant and tried to just distract myself, and Robbie laid on my feet and helped calm me down, and we tried to forget about it. I did go back and leave a really strong negative review about that restaurant later on, and I have never been back to that restaurant. But that restaurant also affects and impacts choices I make years later. My friend and I found a Mexican restaurant in town, in a different town, that didn't question Robbie's presence whatsoever, totally accepting of him. And they were always very warm and friendly and greeted us wonderfully, and it was great. We felt really, really welcome there. And so that became the only Mexican restaurant we went to. And I really enjoy the food. And so that's where we would go. And then that store closed, or that restaurant closed. And I haven't been to another Mexican restaurant because I tried going to another one, and even when Robbie was just in his phase of training where we were eating on patios, the store owners and the employees gave us grief about him, and we managed to convince them that he was a service dog and that it was required by law to allow us access, but they still judged us, and they still looked at us funny, and they still, every time they brought food out to our table, they eyed Robbie and gave him a really, really wide berth, and the service was really slow, and it left an impression. And I really enjoy that type of food. But I haven't found a place to go with Austin because I'm worried about the access issue. And I'm saying that to you guys as a service dog training professional. I don't feel like I have the energy to deal with that BS. And that's what it is. Because it doesn't matter that the law is on my side. If they can't understand, or if someone gets it in their head that they're not going to allow it, there's no big bad police force that's just going to suddenly swoop in and say, hey, this is the law. You got to let them in. It's just me and a piece of paper and whatever magic words I can say. And sometimes that just simply isn't enough. And the sacrifice there is, do I keep going back to this place? Do I try again? Do I try with a new place? Do I have the energy to keep putting myself through access issues? And some teams do, and that's great. And some teams don't. And I don't know if it matters where you live. If you live in a bigger city, maybe there are fewer access issues, but maybe there's more fake service dogs to potentially run into and get punished for their choices. I don't know. I do live in a more rural part of the country. We're always really worried when we travel with a service dog, but we've never had access issues in other states. It's only ever been out here. So I don't know if location matters. I also don't go inside Chinese food restaurants. We always order takeout or drive-through because I just don't know if they're going to understand. And I don't know what they know about service dog law. And it does impact where I go to eat. When I go out to eat with friends and they pick someplace brand new that I've never been to before, the number one thing on my mind is, gosh, I hope they don't put up a fight about us being here. And the number two thing on my mind is, what's the seating like? Will my dog even fit here? Because a lot of restaurants don't take wheelchair accessibility or service dog accessibility into account when they design their floor layout. That's a different topic altogether, but that's always on my mind. So we end up going to the restaurants that we know will let us in because we don't want to put out the energy that comes with, what if they say no and we have to prove, or we have to recite law. And that's a really crappy feeling because as a disabled individual, your world shrinks as it is. And then when you have access issues, it has the potential to shrink more. Other ones that I had with Robbie were hotel ones, always resolved. It just took a lot of explaining of the law and the paperwork. I had one that wasn't so much an access issue, but it was 100% discrimination. My boyfriend and I went to Steak and Shake, and it was a place and it was a specific location that we had been to many times before with Robbie. And then whatever the deal was, one day we went in and the staff was different and even the manager was there. And they made us sit in the back of the restaurant. And we tried explaining, this is against federal law. You can't discriminate us this way. Also, I have a mobility disorder. Please don't make me walk that far. And they were adamant that and the restaurant had like 2 or 3 other patrons in it. It wasn't like it was busy. But they were adamant about it, that if we wanted to eat there, we had to eat in the back of the restaurant so that we were the least disturbing to all of the other patrons who, they didn't say this, but the way we were treated was, our other patrons are way more important than you, so you can sit in the back. And we stayed and we ate there because we were hungry and we didn't feel like finding another place to go eat. But it was humiliating. And it was humiliating. It was degrading. I criticized myself for not standing up to that guy better. But the rational side of me also reminded me that it very well could have ended up with them calling the cops on us for refusing to eat in the back of the restaurant. And it's something too that I never would have expected to be a part of my life as a white person. And I know that's going to touch some nerves, but that's something that's historically a part of the times of segregation and the civil rights movement for the Black community was we shouldn't have to sit in the back of the restaurant because we're different. And that's exactly how we got treated, was you have to sit in the back of the restaurant because you're different. And it, to this day, is a memory that makes me sick to my stomach. It was outright discrimination. And they were totally fine with it. And they didn't see it as wrong. And there's other times with restaurants, seems to be the way it's done, or the most prevalent place that it happens, is we get seated in the back. And there have been a few times where I have said, hey, I have a mobility disorder. Can we have a table closer to the front? And every single time they look down at my service dog, pause, and then look around and go, yeah, I guess so. Sure. And it's like every time I walk into a restaurant that I haven't been to in a while, or I've never been to before, I have to brace myself for whatever BS is about to come my way. And sometimes nothing bad happens, and it's totally fine. And other times we walk into a restaurant, they look at us, smile, look down, see Robbie or Austin, and their whole smile disappears. And they look real nervous and concerned or defensive, or they immediately call for their manager. And sometimes it goes okay. More times than not, we get put in the back of the restaurant by default. And there was one day that I just didn't have patience for my life. And so I said, hey, actually, we'd prefer, why do you always put us, because it was a place that we go often, and they would consistently put us in the back of the restaurant. And so I finally said one day, hey, it's discrimination to put us in the back of the restaurant because of my service dog, right? And the way I approached it was immediately very defensive and accusatory. And I immediately felt bad afterwards, because the hostess said, oh, no, I promise I'm not trying to discriminate against you. He's a really big dog, and I want to try to give you the biggest table possible so that he's as comfortable as possible. And I immediately felt horrible for assuming this person was discriminating against us. But that's how most people treat us, is with discrimination. And so in that instance, I was way off base, and she was just being a really considerate person. And there are times too where we get seated at a table that has like 6 or 8 chairs, and the only thing we can assume is it's probably because I have a really big dog. But there's usually only 2 or 3 of us people eating dinner. And when I ask the hostess, sometimes it's because you have a large dog. And sometimes they do indeed answer, well, we want to put you back here so you're not a disturbance to other patrons. And if that's their answer, we do ask to be put at a different table so that they're getting a learning moment right there on the spot, that what they're doing is discrimination. But again, it goes back to my energy level that day and whatever else is going on. So those are some of the access issues I've had with Robbie. Okay, well, whenever Austin was still in training, he was an SDIT, not technically an SD yet. And my husband and I had a tradition of going to a nearby rodeo every summer. And the first few years we tried going with Robbie, but he really didn't like fireworks. And so we had to leave him at home. And so we usually went without a service dog. It wasn't a problem. It was the one night a year that I got to feel normal. I got to be surrounded by horses again. I got to watch sports that I really enjoy watching. And I got to be a person again. And while I missed Robbie, it was also a chance to have a night away from the service dog, which I don't have very often because no matter what access issues might arise, I know that I do need my service dog, and so I don't leave him at home just if someone has a problem with him. I would only leave him at home if he had a problem with something that we were going to, or if he was injured or needed a break. But we decided that, we'd had Austin so it was 2022. That's right, because we got Austin in September of 2021. So it was 2022, and it was after Robbie had died, and I really wanted to do something fun. We lost Robbie in May, and the rodeo was in July, and I really wanted to go to the rodeo. I was really looking forward to it. The rodeo was something that I would count down the days to, because it was like the one thing that I get to go to. I can't go to bars, I can't go to concerts, I can't go to movies, I can't go to plays, but I can go to the rodeo because the rodeo is outside. And so any loud noise that happens isn't bouncing off of walls and reverberating and hurting me that way. It's still loud, it's still uncomfortable. I usually go into deep cold. And we have to bring coffee and hoodies, and it's a little bit ridiculous, but it's a night for me to do something really, really fun. And Austin's a lot more confident than Robbie ever was. Austin takes life completely in stride. The only thing that we have found actually that he finds weird and a little distressing is a bubble machine. And we are working on that one. It's not a severe reaction, but it's enough of a reaction that now every time I see a bubble machine someplace, I'm like, ooh, we got to work on that. But Austin's fine with loud noises. He's fine with crowds. He's fine with horses. The horses with the people carrying the flags were a little disturbing to him, but he got over it pretty quickly. And we knew we were a lot more confident that we could take Austin to the rodeo with us and that it would be fine. And they aren't a big rodeo, so they don't have a formal website, but on their Facebook page, they did have a few posts about no pets allowed. We were like, all right, well, he's not a pet. It'll be fine. And in Missouri, which is where we are, trainers or service dogs can take the dog to any public establishment. So restaurants, public events, whatever, for the sake of training the dog. And we've been doing this for a while, so we felt pretty confident in our ability to explain this. We were wrong. So we get to the rodeo, and Austin is wearing his gray harness, so he looks very official. It has patches on it. He's standing nicely beside me. He is panting because he's a little excited, but he's not whining. He's not barking. He's not jumping. He's not acting like a fool. He's acting, like a trained dog. And we get up to the gate and they say, "Oh, no pets allowed." And we say, "Well, he's a service dog." Or he's a service dog in training. And we're protected under Missouri law. And they say, "Okay, well, where are his papers?" And I say, "Papers?" And the guy says, "Yeah, his registration papers." And so I try to explain that registration for service dogs, registration and certification aren't required by law in the US for service dogs, either under federal or under Missouri law. And he's like, no, we looked it up online and animals have to be registered. They have to be certified. So these guys had found a scam website and believed it to be true, which is a really crappy situation. And by this point, I'm running Disabled Advantage, and it's literally my job to coach people through these moments. And I hadn't had an access issue in about 4 years. So I was a little rusty. And I started shaking because the adrenaline kicked in. And I just kept reiterating. I was like, I understand that that's what you think, but you're mistaken. Registration, certification sites are scams. That's not legal. It's not legally required in the US. And he was like, "Well, how do you know that?" And so I said, "I'm a service dog trainer. This is my job to know these things." And we even tried pulling out one of my business cards to show him. And I was shaking, but I was still trying to sound as professional as I possibly could. And I was talking to a guy who was maybe in his 30s, but there was also a guy who was probably in his 60s or 70s, and he was shouting in the back, no, gotta be registered, gotta be certified, gotta have papers. And all of them were. It was absurd. And we have our cards. We have everything we possibly could have had with us. We were trying to explain. And when we showed this guy my business card, I honestly was expecting respect. And that's not what I got. What I got was, well, anybody can make a business card. This doesn't make you a service dog trainer. How do I know you're a service dog trainer? I could claim I'm a service dog trainer. I could claim I know stuff. How do I know that you know what you're talking about? Prove to me you're a service dog trainer. Prove to me he's a service dog. Prove to me you're disabled. And even talking about it now, my hands are shaking. And my heart's pounding a little bit harder. And I just stood there. And I looked at my husband like, what the actual fuck is happening here? And I apologize for my cursing, but in that moment, there's not a great way. You're just like, what? And the fact that Austin was well behaved beside me, the fact that I had a business card, the fact that I knew the laws, the fact that I was speaking professionally, none of that mattered to this guy. He wanted me to, on the spot, prove everything that I was saying. Prove that I was a service dog trainer. Prove that I was disabled. Prove that Austin was a service dog. And at this point in Austin's training, he knew 2 tasks. But it's not my obligation, nor is it your obligation to put on a trick show for people to prove that your dog knows things. And people with this kind of attitude are going to use that as their defense for literally anything you say or do. I could have shown Austin bracing, but he would have just said, well, I can train my dog to do that. That doesn't mean shit. And we tried being professional with him. We tried being courteous. We just kept repeating ourselves. And finally, they called the local sheriff over. And this is the only time the cops have been called over because I'm causing a scene, which I definitely was not. But they talked to the local sheriff, and thankfully, the local sheriff was on our side. He knew the correct laws. It was a miracle because most of the time they don't know. But he knew, and he said, yeah, if that's a service dog, it's law. You have to let them in, and papers are not required. And we thanked him, and we were given our ticket and our armband, and we went in. And I saw one other person come in with a service dog that was obviously a service dog, was very well behaved, didn't care about the rodeo, definitely wasn't a pet. You know, there's things you can tell by looking at other service dogs, you know, and you just know, like, either that's definitely a service dog or it's a very, very well-behaved pet that's faking as a service dog, but it's so good that nobody can tell the difference. But I just had to question, did the sheriff had to stay there the whole time to reaffirm them? Or did that person get in scot-free because of the abuse that I got to deal with? And I don't know. I didn't ask them. I just stayed in my chair and I tried to enjoy the rodeo, but it took me a really long time to calm down and it was really stressful. And I didn't enjoy the rodeo as much as I used to because that guy was still weighing on me. And when we left the rodeo, I did something kind of weird. I went back and I thanked him for putting up a fight. And I was not thanking him for being abusive or discriminatory towards me. Let's be clear on that. What I was thanking him for is for that line of argument, because it's the dumbest line of argument I have ever gotten for an access issue, and now I know it's out there. And as a trainer, and as potentially your trainer one day, I want to know exactly what kind of BS people are going to come up with to throw at you. And this was a new one for me. So I am grateful for that experience, but it was absolutely horrible. And here's the thing. I didn't go to the rodeo this year. I wanted to. I really wanted to go do something fun. I wanted to do the one thing that I get to do. Because the CRPS has taken a lot of fun out of my life. I can't go to movies because they're so cold and they're so loud that the vibrations from the sound trigger shock. My body goes into shock and I go very, very cold and I come close to passing out. And if I stay long enough, if I don't pass out, I do start to slur my speech or forget words. And I have a hard time walking because my brain starts to turn off my body parts. And they're on concrete floors and the angle of the chairs. It's a lot of things. But I can't go to movies. I haven't been to a movie since the final Mockingjay movie came out. That was a long time ago. I can't go to concerts because they're loud. And they're really crowded. And there's a risk of people bumping into me and causing a flare. And the only concerts I want to go to are country concerts. And the only two people I have to drive me places hate country music. So that's definitely out too. I definitely can't go to indoor concerts because they're too loud inside. It's getting to the point where indoor restaurants, if they're really busy or even starting to be at peak busy hours, are too much noise and they trigger too much sensory overload or pain flares or cognitive problems where I hear everybody else's conversation and I can't hear the person who's talking to me. Or my brain can't focus on the conversation in front of me because it hears so many other stimuli happening at the same time. I can't go ice skating because my service dog can't be on the ice with me, and what if I fall down? Can't go rollerblading for the same reason. I have poor balance. I need my service dog. There's so much in my life I can't do. And there's so much in my life that I can do because I have a service dog. But when the things that I want to do, because they're fun and they make me feel less different and they make me feel less disabled and they make me feel more alive again, when those places discriminate against me for having a service dog and attack me for having a service dog and question me and put me in a situation where I have to try and prove my knowledge and prove my disability, they take away the fun and they make my world smaller. So I didn't go to the rodeo this year. And I probably won't go next year. And I know I could try again. I could try to raise a better defense. I could try a different rodeo. I could try to have all the right papers and maybe it would work out. But that one experience left a very difficult impression. And it's continued every time somebody fakes a service dog or takes their ESA somewhere or flashes their fake registration or certification papers. You're for sure you're taking some other legitimate disabled person's fun away. And it's hateful and it's ignorant and it's against the law, but people don't care. And that's absolutely horrible. And I felt so vulnerable standing at the front of the line, people backing up behind us. I was on display, having to prove myself to a complete stranger when all I wanted to do was have a night off, have a night to have fun. And this year, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I've been working a lot of long hours to do everything for Disabled Advantage and to help as many people as I can. And I'm not trying to blame anybody that I'm working with. It's just running Disabled Advantage takes a lot of energy. It's extremely difficult being a dog trainer and a business owner when you have CRPS. It is. It's a fact. And I've had a lot of extra medical treatments this year. We were trying some new things, and those took extra energy from me and caused additional pain flares and caused some medical setbacks that we weren't prepared for. And I was too tired to defend my right to be a person with a service dog at a rodeo to a bunch of people who wanted me to prove that I was disabled to prove who I was, and who were all too willing to jump on the discrimination train because they thought they knew better. And I don't know if that's a good example to set for other people. I really wish I had been strong enough to try again this year. And maybe I'll try again next year, but also maybe I won't. Because people don't realize the impact that access issues have on us. They're exhausting. In the moment, they're exhausting, they're humiliating, they make us feel very vulnerable, they feel like an attack. They draw a ton of attention to our being different, which is something that most of us, I think, try to compartmentalize. And even if we do embrace that we're different, it's okay if we say it, but it's not okay if someone else points it out in a very dramatic way, kind of a thing. And they stick with us. And people, healthy people, they don't realize that. To them, it's a blip in their day. Maybe it's a funny story they tell their friends later at our expense. I don't know. But I know it does shape teams' decisions about the future. It shapes your decision when you choose a hotel to stay in, or a state to stop in, or a restaurant to go to or not go to, or an event to take out of your life permanently. And I want better recognition. I want better awareness. I want clear education. I want people with fake service dogs and ESAs to quit trying to take their dog places when they don't have a legal right to, because it really does screw with the rest of us who legitimately have a service dog and legitimately need to be someplace or want to be someplace and have a right to be there. And we have a right to be there without having to prove to someone why we have a right to be there or who we are in the moment. We have a right to not be stripped down and expose all of our weaknesses and all of our vulnerabilities just for the right of admittance into an event, just to please somebody else and meet some standard of theirs. And I don't know what I could have possibly have said to this guy to prove to him that I'm a service dog trainer. If you look at my dog, it's pretty obvious I know what I'm doing. If you go to my website and look at all of my content, it's pretty clear I'm doing something, that I'm making progress, that I'm having an impact, that I'm doing something with my life. If you talk to the people I've worked with, you know. And in that moment, I don't think he cared. I think he was looking for any possible way to keep me out. And it didn't matter to him. We didn't matter. Nothing we had to say mattered. And if it weren't for that sheriff knowing the laws, we wouldn't have gotten in at all. And that's one of the realities of working with a service dog that more people need to be aware of, is that even if an access issue hasn't happened to you, it's happened to another team. And it could very well happen to you one day. And most access issues happen when you're least expecting them and when you're least ready to handle them. One of the things I do try to do is, if I'm having a really good day, I pick places where I've never been before just to see if we can get in and to see if there's going to be an access issue and test the waters, because I know I have the energy to handle it. But that's not everybody's situation. And good days they're kind of hard to find if you're constantly running errands, or if you run a business, or if you work a job, you're spreading yourself more thin. And so access issues are going to happen. And I hope hearing about my experiences and my feelings at the time help someone. I hope they don't make you afraid to go out at all. That's certainly not my intent. I want you to go out. I want you to have fun. I want you to find ways to make your life more full and give yourself reasons to keep going and to keep holding on and to keep getting out there and having good nights, having good days. But I also want you to know that access issues happen to every team at some point in your career with your dog. They're going to happen. And the best you can do is whatever you're able to bring in that moment. That's your best. And it's really hard to forgive yourself afterwards. Oh, I should have done that. Oh, I could have done this. Maybe this would have helped. Maybe that would have helped. You don't know. I've put up really well-reasoned arguments with people and still lost. Because if you find the right personality who loves to toy with people, nothing you say matters. Or you're going to find somebody who genuinely just didn't know, and they take it as a learning opportunity, and they thank you for teaching them. And you guys both get to go on with your day. I can't predict how an issue is going to break for you. I can't predict when or if you're definitely going to have an access issue. But I do hope that hearing about mine, and hearing about mine even as a professional, help you feel a little less alone if you have had access issues of your own. So I am going to say at the end of this that if you've had an access issue and you want to share about it, either in private to me through a message, or if you want to write about it in the comments below to help other listeners feel a little less alone or to hear about a different type of scenario, please write your story in the comments because we do want to hear it. And you're not alone in this. Thank you for listening to this topic about access issues for Service Dog Questions Answered. If you have any questions, please send me a message.